Then Seelmeier told me, look, he's not good and maybe he's old and it would great pleasure to him meeting you once. And I said, yes, it seems to me much better than to write always these letters forwards, backwards. And then I decided really to meet him and of course also to discuss also some questions. It was a strange feeling. I saw him there standing in the door. It was the evening. I was surprised. This is your father? He looked to me old, small, somehow a little bit broken. And it was a very difficult situation because I knew that for him it was one of the most important events in his older days. And I was a visitor and I was his son and I really had to push me somehow to give a certain cordiality or a certain expression of sentiments and he was very, very touched by the situation. His eyes were wet and nearly to tears, and he was also very proud about the situation because he felt that everybody from the family would not have had the power to come to him, and so he treated me somehow like a brave soldier which came through the enemy's lines. I avoided to speak about in the first days of our meeting. I avoided to speak about problematic points, as it is Auschwitz. Then later on, I came to this. Here, as I told you, he exploded, hearing this as a question from their son to him. In the sense, how can you imagine that this is possible for me to do these things? Don't you see at the first line this is a lie or propaganda or I don't know why? When I then stepped backwards and said, okay, selection, I think this was a fact and was admitted by him very clearly. He excused himself by just saying, okay, I can't help hundreds of thousands if there is such a horrible organization and system. But he excused somehow to say, I helped many of them, few of them. I tried to make him clear that even to be in Auschwitz and not to try every day to come away from there is for me an horrible and impossible fact. I could never understand human being can act like this, and it would not change in any position if this is my father or not. It is really for me against all ethic and moral and human understanding and nature.
Rolf left Brazil, but his father stood firm by his National Socialist beliefs with not a word of regret.
All I know is that the subject came up once, after a newspaper had again claimed that he'd carried out inhuman experiments on patients or people in the camp. When I mentioned this, he exploded and shouted, "But I didn't make any experiments. It's all lies. The people volunteered because they got more food if they allowed me to take blood samples." He assured us time and time again that he deserved a statue from the Jews, because as a doctor at the camp, he'd saved many Jewish lives.
It was around 4:30 when we went down to the beach for a swim. Suddenly, my son noticed that the uncle, Mengele, was lying lopsided in the water, and I saw him too. I called to my husband that something was wrong with the uncle. His head was half out of the water, and it was clear that he was struggling desperately. His eyes were fixed and staring, and he looked determined to swim back. Of course, we now know that he had suffered a small stroke.
Wolfram Bossert wrote to the family in Gunzburg, "With great sadness, I carry out the painful duty of informing you of the death of our mutual friend." For the next 6 years, the world escalated the search for Joseph Mengele until, in 1985, with $3.4 million on Mengele's head, the West German police raided Hans Sedlmayer's house in Gunzburg. They found Bossert's letter, which led the Brazilian police to the cemetery at Embu. The body was buried in this little cemetery just outside Sao Paulo on the 8th of February 1979, under the name of Wolfgang Gerhard, in the Gerhard family grave beside Wolfgang's mother. Mengele, the arch-racist, now lay along. These are the remains of Joseph Mengele. During his time at Auschwitz, he carried out some of the most horrific experiments ever known. 400,000 people are said to have died at his hands. Many of the doctors who worked with him lived to continue their academic careers in peacetime Germany. So too did the professors who used his research. Professor Verschuer became professor of genetics at Munster University. He died a renowned scientist and a free man.
I think there's certainly a lesson to be learned, but of course the question is whether it will be learned. Mengele was a colleague. He was a colleague of ours. And he simply completely forgot that scientific without justice and with equal rights certainly ends up in a hell like Auschwitz. But I would say many colleagues are not willing to see that.
At that time, and still today, universities, of course, not only in the West, but also in the West, are educating what my colleague Franklin H. Littell of Temple University, Philadelphia, who is a Methodist minister and a minister of religion, a professor of religion, called technically competent barbarians. And we seem to be educating that to this day. In other words, our university education, I'm speaking as a university professor, is not geared to the kind of society that we are educating towards. And it does not prepare us to oppose the kind of developments that might end up or lead to a Holocaust. And I think this is a tremendous challenge that Mengele poses for us, because Mengele is a product of the kind of system that we still have, of universities all over the world that teach techniques, that teach quote-unquote science, but not the implications of it and not the use to which such things are put.